Welcome to History with Sean Mello. Today we'll be discussing the history of the nation Haiti. Haiti is a beautiful country with a fascinating culture and kind people. However, Haiti is one of the world's poorest, most undeveloped nations. Its development has been halted by the continuous proliferation of extractive and exclusive institutions. The constant involvement of European colonial parties ultimately lead to Haiti's current dismal state. Thus, the exclusive, highly extractive colonial institutions implemented by the Spanish and French in Haiti are responsible for the current undeveloped state of the nation. Haiti is located on the eastern side of a Caribbean island shared with the Dominican Republic. This entire island is known as Hispaniola. Prior to 1492, Hispaniola was inhabited by the Arawak people. Estimates range from about 250,000 to millions of people living on Hispaniola. Prior to the Columbus era, the island was divided into five chiefdoms. These hierarchy-based and complex political systems were each headed by a cacique, or paramount chief. Below him were lesser caciques presiding over villages or districts. There also existed the Netainos, an elite class in the Arawak society. There's not much known about these institutions other than that they were complex, shared a very efficient agricultural system, and had well-defined borders. This all changed in 1492 when Christopher Columbus discovered Hispaniola. He promised the Queen, Isabel, boats filled with gold when he established the colony St. Nicholas, as he imagined Haiti to be filled with fields of gold. So, from the very beginning, the purpose of the Spanish colonies was to extract as much wealth as possible from the island. Columbus disregarded any pre-existing institutions or chiefdoms. Rather, he assigned regions of lands to Spanish settlers in institutions called encomiendas. Encomiendas were a Spanish labor system that rewarded conquerors with the labor of particular groups of subject people. The Spaniard would be entitled to the earnings of that group of natives, usually a village or a group of villages. The Spaniards would be responsible for the Christianization and protection of the natives. The Spanish crown saw this as a preferable alternative to the feudalist institutions they had worked to dismantle in Spain, and so supported it. This was a highly extractive system with the purpose of delivering the gold which Columbus had promised by utilizing the very large present Arawak labor force. However, it became very clear that no such fields of gold existed, and the Arawak people would have to pan and mine for gold like anywhere else. At first, the Spanish ordered all persons 14 years or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given a copper token to hang around their necks. Natives found without the copper tokens had their hands cut off and bled to death. However, the natives were given an impossible task. Many fled to the mountains where they were hunted and killed. Others tried to mount a resistance, but were met by the Spanish guns and steel. Among the Arawak, massive suicides began with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. In just 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, only 125,000 Arawak remained from the original population, which numbered in the millions. Then, the encomiendas took direct control over the mining through slave labor. They were worked at a ferocious pace and died by the thousands. From the original millions, by the year 1515, there were perhaps 50,000 Indians left. By 1550, there were 500. A report from the year 1650 shows none of the original Arawak or their descendants left on the island. As the numbers dwindled, the Spanish worked them harder to make up for lost populations. Reports show that when the men from the mines and women from the fields met once a year, they were often too tired to even procreate, and so, through the Spanish brutality, viciousness, and extractive and genocidal institutions of the encomiendas, the original native population was made extinct. At this point, early 1600s, Hispaniola had no labor force and no gold. The island was more or less just a trading post and refueling stop for ships heading to the mainland. As a result, piracy became widespread, encouraged by European powers hostile to Spain, such as France and England. The Spanish largely abandoned the western third of the island, focusing their colonization effort on the eastern two-thirds. The western part of the island was thus gradually settled by the French buccaneers, or pirates, who would also succeed in growing tobacco on their part of the land. In 1697, the French and Spanish made peace and divided the island as such, which is similar to how it remains. The east being the Dominican Republic with Spanish culture, and west being Haiti with the French culture. In the eastern side, or Saint Dominique, the French saw the opportunity for riches and established plantations, importing over 500,000 African slaves for a population of 50,000 colonists. They began to create sugar plantations, again extracting the wealth to send to France. They soon became France's most profitable New World possession. These institutions were just as brutal as the encomiendas, if not more. Under French control, slaves were brutally worked and died so often that new slaves had to be brought in frequently. French plantation owners worked their African slaves so hard that half died within a few years. It was cheaper to import new slaves than to improve working conditions enough to increase survival. The rate of death of slaves on Saint Dominique plantations was higher than anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere. Over the French's colony's 100-year course, slavery killed about 1 million Africans, and thousands more chose suicide. Food was insufficient, and slaves were expected to grow and prepare for themselves on top of their already crushing 12-hour workdays. The practice was institutionalized by the French king in the Code Noir, which established the punishments, torture, and executions allowed to be given to slaves. Torture of slaves was routine. They were whipped, burned, buried alive, restrained, and allowed to be bitten by swarms of insects, mutilated, raped, and had limbs amputated. The Catholic Church condoned slavery and the practices of the French colony, viewing the institution as a way to convert Africans to Christianity. These horrific practices demonstrate the intensity of the extractive nature of Saint Dominique. Additionally, there existed a very strict hierarchical caste system. The white population comprised of Grand Blanc, elite merchants, landowners, and often royal lineage, followed by Petit Blanc, overseers, craftsmen, and the like, and Blanc Manants, laborers and peasants. The affranchis, who were mostly mulattoes, so part black, part white, were sometimes slave owners themselves. They aspired the economic and social levels of the Europeans, and they feared and spurned the slave majority. However, the colonists generally discriminated against them, and the aspirations of the affranchis became a major factor in the colony's struggle for independence. There were smaller, isolated institutions of escaped slaves called Maroons. Maroons lived in the mountains in their own inclusive societies or institutions. After the mid-17th century, they began raids on plantations and poisoned plant owners. Bookman, a Maroon leader, declared war against the French government in 750, kickstarting the Haitian Revolution. At the same time, the French settlers and the free people of color pressed for a greater political freedom and more civil rights. Tensions between the two groups led to conflict, as a militia of free coloreds was set up in 1790. Seeing this opportunity, large slave armies arose in the north, and soon there was a full-blown slave revolution across the colony. The French and the Haitian armies fought a bloody war, ultimately resulting in Haitian victory. Soon after, the French abolished slavery across this empire to attempt to appease the trading colony, and the Haitian leaders pledged allegiance to France, but still remained independent. Important to note is that the only institutions which have existed in Saint Dominique so far are the plantations and the military, and after the revolution it stays the exact same. In America, a republic was formed because there were governments present in the 13 colonies for the leaders to build off of. In Haiti, no such centralized government exists. The role of the military institutions remains the same, from a French colony to an autocratic military leadership, with a group of generals using their military to maintain power post Haiti Revolution. And for the plantations complex, that institution doesn't change either. The plantation system was re-established, albeit for ages. However, many Haitians resented the heavy-handed manner in which this was enforced, and the marginalization in the new nation's politics. The Code Rural, which denied peasant laborers the right to leave the land and to the towns or start farms or shops of their own, caused much resentment, as most peasants wanted to leave and start their own farms rather than work on plantations. Some say the conditions were worse than slavery, but now they were forced by the military. Ultimately, it makes sense for the new leaders of Haiti to continue the extractive and brutal institutions, because the only natural resource to be shipped is sugar. There are no other systems in place to maintain the economy other than the plantation. The French created a purely extractive system, with the plantations being the only source of wealth. There was no self-sustenance in Saint Dominique's economic system. It inherently relies on trading and making France wealthy, not the colony. And this was the same system adopted by the Haitians after the Revolution. There were no inclusive institutions for the leaders to build off of, no inclusive governments, so they had to continue with the exclusive military-based dictatorships, and no forms of agriculture or industry, so they had to continue the plantations. The only option is to keep the same extractive systems. And of course, this leads to constant rebellion and political instability. The leaders are being overthrown or assassinated constantly as the people want to escape this vicious cycle. But the persistent theme is that the leaders who lead coups or assassinations soon become dictators themselves, as there's no real inclusive institutions to build off of. which leads to huge political instability, as presidencies overthrow empires which overthrow kingdoms, and the cycle lasts for over 100 years. To make matters worse, no country is willing to trade with Haiti. They refuse to recognize the independence of a slave nation and thus embargo it. This means that a nation which is built on a trade economy has no one to trade with, leading to great economic decline. Only in 1826 does France agree to recognize Haiti for a price, a modern day equivalent to 22 trillion US dollars. This enforced payments to France hampered Haiti's economic growth for years. Haiti must now borrow huge sums of loans from the US, Germany, and Britain, which leads to even greater debt. Haiti was paying almost 80% of its GDP for these payments from 1826 to 1947, over 100 years. This greatly reduces the development of the nation and public works funding. In the early 20th century, the US occupies Haiti. This was to protect American influence in the region. Here, the Americans try to better the nation, and many public works are undertaken. They use an institution called corvier, which is a form of unpaid labor in which peasants were taken from their homes to work on roads, buildings, and other works in slave-like conditions. This brought huge American resentment, but ultimately provided Haiti with some form of development. Infrastructure improvements were particularly impressive. Roads, bridges, irrigation canals, hospitals, schools, and public buildings were all constructed. During the FDR presidency, the Americans install a pro-American president in Haiti, except the new president doesn't want to leave, causing an era of political instability. So there was a coup, and then the next one doesn't want to leave, causing another coup, and the next one doesn't want to leave, so there is another coup, and then the next one doesn't want to leave, so of course there's another coup. This results in the dictator Papa Doc Duvalier in 1957. Instead of fighting the exclusive institutions, he adopts it and exacerbates it, establishing a true reign of terror. He creates an institution called the Tonton Macoute, a secret police which would drag dissidents from their homes onto the streets and burn them to death. The entire economy becomes centered around extracting as much wealth as possible to support his lifestyle and fund the Tonton Macoute, preventing another coup. This continues with his son after his death. In modern day, we reach a society which knows only exclusive and extractive systems of government for their entire history. Military coups are common and elections are fraudulent. Even the current president, Moi, is refusing to step down. Ever since the revolution, most of the economy is being spent on either paying debts, funding the military, or paying the current dictator. Haiti never develops an economy past an extractive one, a vicious cycle. Today, Haiti doesn't even have the technology or capital inputs to compete with modern, large-scale mechanized farming in Brazil with sugar, or the United States with rice, or many other places. It doesn't even have an efficient small basic farming sector that can provide enough food to feed the country. And the manufacturing sector that dominates in Haiti produces mostly t-shirts and other low-value products. Most of what little foreign exchange the country's citizens earn is spent on imported food, which makes up 50% of the food Haitians consume today. Evidently, the main extractive economic institutions and exclusive political institutions established by Haiti's colonial powers continue to hurt Haiti today in a vicious cycle. The military, the main form of power used by the French, continues to be the main form of power of modern day dictatorships and prevents the inclusive governments, such as democracies, from coming to fruition. Furthermore, the extractive economic system of slavery and plantations established by the Spanish and French could not be adapted to a non extractive model. By creating an economic model that only served to be extractive, future governments were unable to transform the plantation institutions, and the vicious cycle continued, adapting to modern industry. Haiti needs its own critical juncture, a point in history that removes the economic and political institutions the nation was founded on, ending the vicious cycle and establishing a virtuous one. The extractive institutions of the colonial era never left Haiti and will continue to drain the Haitian people until change is made.